Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larson, ready to kick off our best of 2024 episodes, celebrating our favorite in movies, TV, and music from the year. We're going to start with TV, and my guests are bringing a whole bunch of characters to the table. We've got detectives, we've got robots, we've got witches. That is all coming up. We're going to share some picks from you, the listener, as well. As a matter of fact, why don't we start there? Anna Hagen emailed us at tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net to make the case for Interior Chinatown on Hulu. This is about a waiter in a Chinatown restaurant who witnesses a crime and becomes something of a detective figure. Anna said this: Interior Chinatown is something between romantic comedy and sci-fi existential horror. It challenges the church on how we welcome the stranger and what it means to be part of a family. Also, it's beautiful. Anna added, "Thank you for bringing perspective into so much good media. I love discovering stuff with you." Well, thank you, Anna. In this case, I'm discovering something thanks to you. Interior Chinatown, that series slipped by me this year, but it definitely sounds intriguing. All right, let's get to some other picks. These coming from a few of our regular voices here on the TC podcast. Kathryn Freeman, Joe George, and Abby Olchesi. They're going to share their favorite TV shows of 2024. Welcome to Kathryn Freeman, Joe George, and Abby Olchesi. I have a TV adjacent question to start here for you three. So when it's TV time, okay, you're settling in for your favorite series or something you're interested in. You've committed to at least one episode, maybe two for the night. What's your go-to snack? Is there something you always grab, a snack or a drink? I'm boring. I'm still stuck. They're probably way out of trend at this point, but the IPA, the beer, I'll just grab that and I'm happy. Where do you guys go? What direction, Kathryn? Is it, or do you stay away from snacks altogether when it's TV time?
I am a chips and salsa and a sparkling water girl.
Okay, that sounds really good. Nice, nice. How about you, Joe?
It depends if children are watching with me, which it sounds way more exciting than it actually is. If kids are watching with me, then it's going to be like chips or popcorn. If it's by myself, it's either going to be a bowl of frosted mini wheats or a cup of tea, which sounds
I love
very
that.
sophisticated, but it's not.
Oh, sounds cozy to me. I did like that a lot. How about you, Abby? Where do you go?
I kind of go all over the place. I sometimes like to fix myself a little cocktail. That's nice. I got for Christmas last year from a friend a really cool popcorn maker. It's like a silicone popcorn bowl that you can basically, it allows you to cook popcorn in the microwave like microwave popcorn, except that it's not all gross. It's like just normal popcorn. So because that has now been made so easy for me, like there are no pots and very little cleanup involved, I've been finding myself eating that more. So that can be a go-to snack too.
Very good. Yeah. And you could thematically match too, I suppose, if
totally.
you have a variety, right? Depending on your mood. So
and the season too. Like I've been known to have candy corn during Halloween and, cookies during Christmas. So
there you go. I like it. All right. At the end of the show, we'll have given listeners a lot of snack suggestions in addition to some good TV to catch up with. But let's get to that. Let's get to the matter on hand. And we do have about 3 shows we're going to cover, a pick from each of you, but a good variety, I think. How about we start with Joe? Your pick is a Marvel series that streamed on Disney Plus, Agatha All Along. Now, I'm going to confess that I clung to the MCU as long as I could. I'm actually pretty proud at how long I hung in there, but did recently fall away. I enjoyed the Marvels, but just couldn't do Deadpool and Wolverine. And then after that, once I stepped away, it was hard, even though I liked WandaVision, to jump back in for Agatha All Along. But I mostly saw positive reactions. So Joe, catch me up on the show, what it's all about, and then maybe why I should have stuck with it.
Well, so you're right to say it's a spinoff of WandaVision. It follows what turns out to be the big bad of WandaVision, Agatha Harkness, who's a witch/trickster, played by Kathryn Hahn. And this show kind of follows her gathering together a group of what they're calling covenless witches. So magic-using women who, for one reason or another, are cut off from the sort of community of magic users. And they all have their own reasons for getting involved. One of the big ones is a young man played by Joe Locke, who up until the very second to last episode is just referred to as teen, which is a lot of fun. And there's all sorts of reveals and reversals that kind of go along with it in deep Marvel lore if you're like me and you're into that. If you're not into that, it's just watching a bunch of really great performers. Like I said, Kathryn Hahn, always
Love her.
wonderful. Aubrey Plaza, always wonderful. Patty LuPone, Shashir Zamita, really great cast. And even if you don't know which issue of Marvel Premiere from 1972 they're referring to right there, it's delivered in such a wonderful way. And there's larger themes about loss and power, which is always interesting to me. But I think my down the middle pitch to most people is, even if you're tired of the Marvel thing, it's still a lot of fun to watch these people bounce off each other. And that's a great pleasure of the show.
All right. I like it. Yeah, that's kind of what I had heard, is that it kind of can get around the MCU exhaustion that some people were feeling. That's one reason that people liked it. Abby, is that what you found? I believe you checked out some of Agatha all along.
I did, yeah. I did enjoy what I saw too. I think the problem was that there was so much good TV this year that it just kind of ended up at the bottom of the pile after a little bit. But yeah, it's the dynamic between all of the different performers is a lot of fun. Patty LuPone kills it, which is not a surprise. Also, just the fact that it came out during October and it had all of these really fun kind of spooky vibes to it really kind of complemented Halloween viewing when it was out. It's solid. The art direction is a lot of fun. It's highly enjoyable.
Nice. Now, Joe, so regular listeners know we're a horror-friendly podcast here. Still, for some listeners who, when you talk about witches and that's kind of the center and might raise the eyebrow a little bit, can you tell me from a TC perspective what sort of interesting or resonated with you, at least, about Agatha all along?
Well, so it is a Marvel show. So if that really is a hang up for you, just think of it as superpowers, because there's really not too much of a difference between the stuff that they do and the stuff that Captain America or Iron Man does. However, it does try to tie itself into history of accusations of witches in American history. Or the big antagonist up until the very end is a group called the Salem 7, which, if you know the Marvel comics, they are somehow not as dumb as the Marvel comic version of Salem 7, who are in 6 issues and are absolutely ridiculous, but they're kind of dumb in their own way. They're kind of a cheesy horror movie. Anyway, the point that I'm getting at here is that in actual American history, like in the Salem witch trials, the accusation of witchcraft was either used by powerful men who were threatened by women, usually if they got one of these women pregnant and they did not want to be accused. This was a quick way of silencing their accuser, or was a way to censure women who were going for power. And so even if the word witch is a distasteful for you, the show does a good enough job of putting that in the context of these are women who have been accused in some way or another. And I think the show does a nice job of tying that search for power with some sort of greater loss. Each of these women have been rejected from their larger communities for one reason or another and find themselves at points of accusation. And I think whenever we are dealing with folks who have been excluded or oppressed or downtrodden, that's where God chose to intercede as a human being in the form of Jesus, which means that we can find some pretty quick connections there, and especially in relationship to the ideas of power. Why are these women oppressed? What are they chasing after? Even if the language might be the type that you're not used to, the themes are there.
Yeah, and I like the corollary you make to superpowers too, with whether these are spells or whatever might be cast. I think that's something folks sometimes get tripped up on, even going back to concerns over the whole Harry Potter phenomenon, right? But really, it is just another form of, well, in that case, people would point out the wizards in the Lord of the Rings saga, which are, very friendly and accepted. So that context is helpful as well. All right. So that's Agatha all along, one to catch up with if you haven't yet, there on Disney Plus. Kathryn, let's get to your pick next, which is Bad Monkey. This is a detective series starring Vince Vaughn. It's adapted from the Carl Hyacin novel, and it's set, as so much of Hyacin's work is, in Florida. Tell us a little bit about why this was one of your favorite shows of the year. This is one I did catch. I'll just say it was a delightful surprise. I had really no expectations and enjoyed it quite a bit. What'd you like about it?
Similarly, I stumbled upon it because Apple TV is terrible, notoriously not great at promoting their shows. But I think I was the new season of Slow Horses had started, and I was like, oh, what's this? And I will just say, my niche love in television is detective stories, particularly ones that are not super gruesome, that are that feature quirky detectives, I will always watch. Vince Vaughn plays this detective who's in the Florida Keys, kind of lives kind of like an isolated life, doesn't seem to form a lot of like close personal attachments. And he's had a lot of disappointments in his life. He starts off as this kind of like hotshot Miami PD detective. And then he continuously is like demoted amongst law enforcement. A big part of why he continues to be demoted is he cannot follow instructions when people like want to turn a blind eye to like corruption. He's just like relentless in his pursuit of justice, so much so that it cost him in his personal relationships, even amongst like close friends. And people know this about him. His own father, like multiple times, is like, just let it go. And he cannot let things go. And he finds himself in these really ridiculous, quite funny situations. But I think what spoke to me like at the heart of it is just his commitment to like fairness and justice is admirable. I don't know that all of his sacrifices are wise, but I will say oftentimes it's very easy to choose the comfortable route. And he's like surrounded by people, even like his best friend sends him on this errand and is like, just dump this body part somewhere. And he cannot do it. And it sets him on this whole like larger conspiracy. He has like federal agents. FBI is like, we can't go any further. Just leave it alone. I think people identify with that. Like, we can't go any further with this. This is just how things are, choosing our own comfort and security. And I think as flawed of a hero as Vince Vaughn's character is, this idea of committing to truth, justice, when you know that you're not going to be comfortable, when it is going to cost you something, it's going to cost you prestige. It might cost you financially. It might cost you relationally. Yeah, I just found it really admirable that he continued to pursue.
Yeah, and I think that Vaughn's persona, I found it key to making that palatable, because what you're describing, if someone hasn't watched the show, it's all totally accurate, but they might be assuming it's like very noble. You know, and somehow because it's Vince Vaughn and he's always like making little snarky comments, it's almost like he stumbles into this nobility despite himself in a way. And I just thought the performance was so great. It'd been a while since I'd really seen Vince Vaughn in anything, so maybe it's just because I needed some time off, but it very much reminded me of how when he first burst onto the scene and he just seemed so fresh and have this improvisational way of relating to other actors on screen. That's all here. And I found it delightful, but also as you were talking, Kathryn, it plays very much into that quality and makes him seem like this is something maybe we are all capable of if we wanted to.
Yeah, because he seems pretty inept. Like the idea that the sort of Vince Vaughn-ness of it, the idea that he's like this like super detective, I don't think that's like not the impression that I was like left with. And a lot of it is just his like curiosity, you know? And so I think there is this tension, right? Like I had someone say to me once, a strength overutilized is a weakness. So there is this tendency in certain points where his curiosity, his desire, I do think is a weakness in his personal relationships, and finding that balance of like, what does it look like to tell the truth in love? The sort of discernment, judiciousness is something he's not always great at distinguishing, which is played for great laughs. But I do think for us, like as Christians and believers, wanting to pursue justice and truth, but then also there is a time and place, and like we're in relationship with certain people, so we have a responsibility to them that maybe we don't have to others. So just thinking through all of those things, it really brought up a lot of that. But I loved it. Jodie Turner-Smith is in it, who's fantastic in everything. I thought the supporting cast was really funny. And again, you don't have to be perfect to do this. I think your point, Josh, is great about anybody can do this, because he's in the whole series. He's in this very petty feud with his neighbor, and he's terrible to that guy. And so, yeah, it is kind of inspiring. Like, we can be this in some ways.
The other thing related to the justice aspect that I appreciated is, and this goes back to Hyacinth, you know, setting so much of his work in Florida and being very attuned to the environment. Creation care is interwoven with the idea of justice here. It's very much, this is part of Vince Vaughn's character too. He's very much into protecting the animals and the landscape of Florida. And I just like that element. It was woven in pretty naturally. And this idea that can resonate with us as Christians as well too, is that creation care is a form of justice too. So I think Abby and Joe, you guys have both seen a little bit of this. Was it one you liked as well, Abby?
Yeah, I loved it. I watched the whole thing. My parents were watching it simultaneously, so we would comment back and forth about what we thought.
Nice.
Week to week. And one of the things that I think is a real strength of a lot of Bill Lawrence, the producer of his shows, he also did Shrinking and Ted Lasso and Scrubs, which I'm less of a fan of, but I think that's mostly just me. One of the things that I really like about his shows is how deeply relational they are. And I think Vaughn's performance really leans into that, in that every interaction he has with other people feels really natural. And I think a lot of the relationships on that show whether they're people that he interacts with directly or side plots. Like, they're really deeply explored. They're very layered. The characters all feel very complex, but also just kind of delightful to be around as well. That's a balance that I think Bill Lawrence as a showrunner is really, really good at pulling off. And the fact that it goes well with a storyline that does get pretty dark at times, it's a really interesting tonal balance that I got a lot out of.
Would you make a Bad Monkey, Joe?
I loved it. I watched the entire thing yesterday. Just was going to throw on a couple
Oh,
episodes
wow.
and just spent the entire day sitting there watching. I mean, look, the soundtrack is mostly Tom Petty covers.
And they're so
That's a
good.
great element.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're so good.
Yeah, as a white man in his 40s, I am obligated to be excited about Tom Petty covers. No, it's great. I mean, because it's very much in the model of a hard-boiled detective, old noir. It's kind of got that not always great morality of, Philip Marlowe or Sam Spade. Just if Bogey was a little bit more of a fast talker, yeah, that sort of thing. And I've always attracted to that idea of the person that's kind of pushed outside. He's a former cop, so he's close to the center, but the person that's the unexpected person from their position of being outside, being able to sort of take down a larger, seemingly powerful person, and the sense of justice that very goes back to a biblical story. The way that the big bad is offed in the very end was very satisfying. I don't want to give spoilers away there, but there is dog consumption and somebody falling from a great height. Remind me of an Old Testament story.
I wanted to say, well, I'm also in my 40s, but Black woman, I actually really appreciated the Tom Petty covers. I don't know his discography, but that's like actually one of my favorite ways to like discover artists is to like choose someone unconventional to like cover a song. And so I actually thought was like one of the great characters in the TV series was the soundtrack, and I really quite enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, and Petty being originally from Florida, right? It makes sense thematically, and just getting to hear all those great songs with a little different spin on them, that was a really nice touch. So our last title is another Apple TV production, and it is Sunny. This is your pick, Abby. It's about an American living in Kyoto. She's played by Rashida Jones, and we meet her shortly after her Japanese husband and young son go missing when their plane crashes. She receives this homebot, I think Sunny is called in the show, named Sunny. And the homebot comes from the tech company basically where her husband had worked. And so she starts to put clues together, and a lot of questions are raised about what other projects he might have been involved in. Now, I did watch this one too. I enjoyed a lot about it. I really like Jones's performance, but in the end, and speaking of music, sometimes you kind of clue in with these shows. I think probably my favorite thing was the opening credit sequence, which has
it's
these
so good.
pop art
Yeah.
graphics, right? And then this torchy theme song by Mari Atsumi, who I knew nothing about. And apparently there's like a 2003 album this is from that I've kind of had on repeat the last couple days.
Good to know.
Yeah, it's really, really good theme song. So I got hooked on that and drifted a little bit, finished the series, but drifted a little bit from it as it went on.
Yeah.
I'm very curious then to hear what you thought, Abby. It sounds like maybe you found more about it to like.
For sure. And I think toward the end, there's one episode in particular that I think really makes it stand out and makes it kind of, I think, a PC-friendly pick. And one of the things that I really love about the show, I mean, there are a lot of things that I really appreciated about it, but the style you mentioned is just like, it's very stylish. There's a lot of cool stuff to look at, a lot of things that it kind of immerses you in about like contemporary Japanese culture, that some of which were familiar, some were unfamiliar, but it's really cool to kind of watch Rashida Jones's character interact with all of that. She has kind of a contentious relationship with her mother-in-law that ends up kind of leading to some interesting places too. But largely, in the last few episodes of the show, it really becomes not just a mystery, but it becomes a story about loneliness, about human loneliness and the desire to connect. We get that particularly, there's an episode called Who's in the Box? I think it's like the episode right before the finale. And people get really up in arms when you say that things are a bottle episode, but it's a standalone kind of episode that takes place away from the main action. And the deal is that Sunny has killed somebody who was trying to hurt Susie, her person. And because that caused her to break her protocol, she basically bricks. And she goes basically inside herself and has this long consideration as to whether or not she should wipe herself and return to her factory settings. And that is done all in the style of a Japanese game show, which is also fascinating. The aspects of it are really interesting in that it becomes about Sunny's programming. and why she is made the way that she is, and whether or not she has actually done bad things or whether she was doing it in the name of trying to protect the person that she was supposed to protect and take care of, which is Susie. And there's a point at which, like, she imagines her creator, Masa, Susie's husband, there in the audience, and she says, if I am bad, then it's because I was programmed that way. So why did you make me that way? And we learn kind of over the course of the episode that it's because these robots were made to be companions. They were made to help people with their loneliness, which meant that they had to have authentic human emotions. And so when you introduce authentic human emotions to an equation like that, things get messy. The episode ends, I think, kind of heartbreakingly and on this real cliffhanger that I won't spoil, but the process to get there is so interesting and lovely. And I agree that there were, up to that point, there had been like maybe the episode or two right before that where I had started to drift too, and this was the one that like really brought me back in and just kind of walloped me from the side. And for that reason alone, I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, I'd agree. That was a standout episode and got at some very interesting questions about free will and, like original sin, if you want to put it in those terms. Even.
Yeah.
All of this good like robot AI stuff that I think we keep coming to these sorts of characters for because they're stand-ins for us, right? In that way, but allow a little bit of distance. It was maybe the Yakuza, like the gangster subplots where I started to get like, at points I'd be like, I wonder if this was removed entirely, if
there are parts that
the
are
show
less
would
well
even
developed.
suffer, right?
Yeah, and I think some of their motivations are a little bit less clear, and when they become clear, it's not quite as compelling as everything else that's going on around it. But I think the main story is really good enough in the last couple of episodes, especially to really kind of move things along and keep you connected.
Yeah, and you've teased out, I think, some of the things that TC listeners for sure might like to dig into when it comes to Sunny. Yeah,
for sure.
All right. Well, before we go, I think we did the television of 2024 justice with Sunny, Agatha All Along, and Bad Monkey. But, we've got our episodes coming up. You guys will not be back for these, unfortunately, but music and movies, I'd like to hear while I still have you, if you have any favorites in any of those categories. What wowed you when it came to the music and or movies of 2024? Kathryn, is there anything you want to highlight? I can guess here, but I'll let you go.
So I was like racking my brain to try to not say Beyonce.
It's a good album.
I will just say for me, Cowboy Carter, partly because I am from Texas, and this sort of meshing of it just sounds like Texas, especially being from like a Texas city. Like, as much as people try to like separate genres, particularly based on race, the Linda Martell genres are a funny little thing. Like, I will say the kind of back half, starting from like the Willie Nelson to the end, I don't think the Jolene and Blackbird is as successful for me, but I think personally, like just the storytelling and the sound of it sounds so much of the way like I grew up and my experience in college. So putting the obvious Cowboy Carter aside, I am going to go with Inside Out 2. I don't see a lot of movies, and Inside Out 2 I think really struck a chord for me. I think so much of the Pixar movies, this is probably true of lots of people, like even as adults, like I went with my sister and we bawled. It was also interesting. We went and the lady behind us was like having like a personal like worship service, was like, thank you, Lord. There's like a line in the movie where I think one of the characters says like anxiety, you can't have a hold on her or something like that. And the lady like was like, amen. I think even for adults, there was something very cathartic about sort of the introduction of like complex emotions and what does it mean to be human and how do you learn to deal with these things, and just the change of like growing up and things change and how do you navigate those things and how do you talk to people about how you're feeling. And so I thought it really resonated with me. So as my non-Cowboy Carter Beyonce, I'm going to go with Inside Out 2.
Yeah, and it hits that Pixar benchmark, which you were just talking about for me, Kathryn, too, is like, yes, kids are maybe the main audience, but maybe 60% in mind as the audience and 40% are adults, and it works for both audiences. So I liked Inside Out 2 quite a bit as well. Joe, anything else you want to throw out there?
I don't think I've listened to an album from 2024, so I will say nothing about that.
It's been all Tom Petty for you in 2024.
I mean, you joke, but that's what's going to be the rest of the year, is that greatest hits album. I feel like my top movies are kind of the obvious ones for movie nerd. Like Challengers is still my number one. I think it's outstandingly well-made movie. I really like People's Joker is a strange one that I think is a miracle.
It's so good. It's wild.
But one that I want to throw out there because I just watched it and was shocked at how good it was A Real Pain with Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, I want to see that.
It felt like such an obvious Sundance movie. It's about two cousins. One's played by Jesse Eisenberg, the other one by Kieran Culkin, who after the death of their grandmother, go on a remembrance tour for Holocaust victims to her hometown in Poland. And Eisenberg's character is kind of a classic Eisenberg character, kind of buttoned down and nervous. And Culkin's character is extremely gregarious, but certainly has emotional problems. And the way that I describe that sounds like, like the most obvious Sundance movie, kind of sounds like the Everything is Illuminated adaptation from 10 years ago, which is not very good. And I am shocked at how empathetic and complicated and smart and well handled the movie is. I suspect it'll make its way into my top 5, and I really, really recommend that people check that one out.
Wow.
I've
Okay,
been I've been describing that one to friends as Millennial with no and I, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I feel like the dynamic is like, it's a little different, but like the themes of using one form of behavior or maybe even like substance use as a crutch to cover deep, deep hurt is something that shows up in that movie a lot, and I think was handled really interestingly.
A Real Pain is one I still need to see. Unfortunately, time is running out for all my voting and list making. So yeah, it is definitely on my to watch list. Abby, what do you got for us?
Oh gosh. There were a surprising number of albums that it always takes me a second to kind of go back over the year and be like, what were things that actually did come out this year that I really loved? And there were a lot. It was a good year for music. So I think I've already been on record as saying that I really love the Idols album Tank. I think it's their most emotionally mature yet. And I love that band like they're my own family. So that's saying a lot. There was also the country artist Charlie Crockett had an album called $10 Cowboy that I liked a lot and has some songs on it that feel to me particularly apropos to this moment in time. There's one called America that I've listened to a whole bunch. The Nick Cave album, Wild God, is one that I attached to pretty hard because I love Nick Cave very much. I'm actually going to get to see him live for the first time in May, and I'm really excited. Yeah, it's going to be an all-timer for me, so I can't wait to hear him play songs from that live. Movies, there were a lot that I loved this year too. I agree with Joe People's Joker is really, really incredible. I liked Sean Baker's Anora a lot. He always does such a really interesting job with creating empathetic characters in very specific situations that you wouldn't think to look for them. And the acting in that is really, like, I think Cassavetes level incredible. Another one that really did stick out for me this year was the Annie Baker movie Janet Planet, which is about kind of 11-year-old girl and her mom in the early 90s in Massachusetts, just kind of following their lives for a summer. And there's a lot about that I connected to. The mom and daughter, I know it's like rural Massachusetts, but they remind me so much of stories that like my friends in Lawrence used to tell me about them growing up with like granola crunchy moms who like shopped at the community mercantile. And it just like, I felt like I knew these people deeply. And Annie Baker is so good at creating a sense of presence and place, both in this, her first film, and also in her plays, which I only know because I spent the rest of the summer reading her plays because I liked that movie so much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was a real journey. I love that movie, and I love how it really treats the experience of childhood as a sacred thing that's worth paying attention to all the little details of in a way that movies don't always.
Yeah, the way her camera is able to capture what that young girl is perceiving and observing and what it means to her, it's special, very intimate. That's a lot of good stuff. Thank you for going beyond your TV picks and sharing all of that. I very much appreciate it. Merry Christmas to each of you. And yeah, here's to another year of podcast together in 2025.
Yeah, thanks.
Merry Christmas. Thanks, Josh.
Bye. Merry Christmas.
Aside from Anna at the top of the show, we did get picks sent in from other listeners via email and social media, calling out 2024 TV shows like Fargo, Day of the Jackal, Halo, Star Wars Skeleton Crew, and Somebody Somewhere. Now, that last one, starring comedian Bridget Everett, just wrapped up its season on HBO Max. My wife is a big fan. I only caught an episode or two with her, but from what I saw, offered a fascinating portrayal of church as a complicated but also very matter-of-fact part of life. So pretty unique. One more pick here. This came over on our YouTube channel. We heard from Neurodivergent Homestead 120, who had this to say about The Chosen. It brings the Gospels to life beautifully. Thank you to everyone who weighed in with their favorite TV of this year. The best music of 2024 is up next. We're going to be posting that early in January. If you still want to share a pick with us, there is time. We might be able to include it in that show or our final installment on movies. So you can send those to tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net That's tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. Now, if you want to connect with us on social media, the best way to do that these days is either Facebook or probably Instagram. We're very busy on Instagram. You'll find clips from our podcast episodes, as well as posts and videos drawn from our articles over at thinkchristian.net. The TC Podcast is a listener and donor-supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. You can visit reframeministries.org for more information. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder. I'm Josh Larson. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to celebrate the best music of 2024 as we continue to connect our pop culture fandom with our faith.